After helping to revolutionize the gaming industry with the Nintendo 64, Nintendo launched its next console, the GameCube, in 2001. It would ultimately sell poorly, especially when compared to the dominant console at the time, the PlayStation 2, but it is often looked back on fondly by those who grew up with it. One of the reasons why is because this was an era where Nintendo wasn't afraid to experiment. This was the system where Mario would adopt a water jet, where Metroid would enter 3D with a first-person shooter, where Zelda would take on a cartoonish art style, and where a new series centered around controlling a league of plant-like aliens would be born. And this was evident from the beginning of the console's lifespan, as one of the game's launch titles would star not their flagship plumber, but rather his brother in a horrifying adventure through a ghost-infested mansion. It remains one of Nintendo's stranger first-party titles, and yet is also beloved by those who played it back in the day, myself included. What makes it such a different experience and a title that remains just as charming and fascinating as it was 20 years ago? That's what we're gonna find out. This is Luigi's Mansion. At Nintendo Space World 2000, Nintendo unveiled a demo featuring Luigi inside a haunted mansion being chased by ghosts, giving fans the first taste of the game that awaited them next year. Luigi's Mansion was directed by Mario Kart and Yoshi's Island director Hideki Kono, who nowadays manages Nintendo's mobile game division. Joined by Shigeru Miyamoto and Takeshi Tezuka as producers, the development team set out to create a spooky adventure game set in the darkest reaches of the Mushroom Kingdom. The concept was born from the idea of a game set in a large house with many rooms that players would wander between while evading evil spirits. Kono compared the layout of the house to a dollhouse in which there's only one real view to see everything, as one wall in each room is missing. Originally envisioned as a Japanese-style home, the setting was changed to a European-style mansion to create a more haunted mansion vibe. However, rather than putting Mario in the starring role, it was decided to put Luigi in the spotlight, as the developers wanted the lead character to be terrified as they explored, and Mario's heroic image didn't fit the bill. This was not the first time Luigi had a lead role, as he originally took first billing in the 1993 educational game Mario is Missing, but Luigi's Mansion was more or less his official debut as a central character. The game initially began development for the Nintendo 64, but at some point switched over to the GameCube to take advantage of that system's capabilities, including real-time shadow generation. Hardware development on the console itself wasn't finished when Luigi's Mansion was being built, so the team was able to request features to be added to the system to help make the game look and feel better. One of the earlier ideas was to incorporate the GameCube's support of stereoscopic 3D into the game, though this was eventually dropped because the cost to ship 3D peripherals with the console was too high. The team wanted to use a two-stick control scheme, with one stick handling movement around an area and the other influencing the direction you face. This was done to add more challenge, and while this concept would be awkward for players at first, the developers realized it would quickly become second nature. But this actually influenced the design of the GameCube's controller, as the layout hadn't been finalized yet, with Nintendo altering the C-stick to make it more comfortable to use for extended periods of time. Because the game was set to launch alongside the system, work was sometimes difficult for the staff members during development. Lead programmer Hiroki Sotoiki noted that the team would sometimes argue over whether or not certain features could or couldn't be implemented into the game on time. However, the developers managed to work through these frustrations and get the game ready in time for the GameCube's Japanese launch in September 2001. While there was initial blowback against the game since Mario wasn't starring in a launch title for the system, Luigi's Mansion still received positive reviews and was a commercial hit, selling 2.5 million copies and becoming the 5th best-selling GameCube game of all time. So what makes it a standout title even today? Let's dive into the game and see. Luigi's Mansion begins with the plumber on his way to visit a mansion he's just won in a contest that he apparently didn't even enter. Mario set off to check out the mansion some time ago and hasn't returned, so Luigi enters the spooky domicile in hopes of finding his brother, but instead finds a bunch of ghosts who nearly get the jump on him before he's saved by Professor Elvin Gadd, or EGAD for short. EGAD, an eccentric paranormal scientist, says that the mansion didn't even exist until a few days earlier, and bestows onto Luigi the Poltergust 3000, a vacuum designed for capturing ghosts. With this tool, Luigi sets off into the mansion to save his brother and trap the spectral inhabitants contained within. Luigi's Mansion is primarily an adventure game that mixes in elements of the survival horror and Metroidvania genres. The only real controls you have to work with are walking around and controlling the poltergust and flashlight, alongside the A button, which performs context-sensitive actions. Primarily it's used to interact with objects and scenery or to open doors, but it also makes Luigi call for his brother if you aren't in front of anything. Mario! It serves no purpose, but it's oddly satisfying nonetheless, especially since Luigi's voice becomes more unnerved and panicky as he loses health. Mario? Indeed, the only tools you'll be relying on for 95% of the game are your flashlight and vacuum. Luigi's flashlight is always turned on in dark rooms unless you manually switch it off, and when you blast a light in a ghost's face, it will momentarily stun them, cueing you to turn the poltergust on them. The direction you're facing is critical, not just because you need to carefully aim your flashlight, but also because of how the vacuum works. The poltergust only knocks down a ghost's health if you're holding the control stick in the opposite direction of your target, which isn't easy to maintain because they do not go down without a fight. Some ghosts put up more of a struggle than others, but if you aren't manipulating the stick to match their movement, you're not going to be able to hold onto them for long. EGAT also supplies Luigi with a Game Boy Horror, which, in addition to being a great pun, is used for keeping track of everything you encounter. It contains a map of the whole mansion, information on all the portrait ghosts you've beaten, and all the money you've collected. But you can also use it to scan the environment around you to examine objects, or scan any mirror you find if you need to warp to the entrance to the mansion. The Game Boy Horror can also identify weaknesses in portrait ghosts if you scan their hearts, which gives you a hint as to how to capture them. The portrait ghosts are the main objective besides finding Mario, and each one requires more clever tactics to get them to show their heart. Often you need to interact with the environment or wait for a specific opportunity to strike, and figuring out what each ghost is looking for necessitates careful observation. This is all you're doing for most of the game, but for how small your arsenal is, the designers really squeezed everything they could out of it. When you're using the vacuum but aren't locked onto anything, the direction Luigi's facing is fixed, meaning you need to manually turn him around, and since this game doesn't feature automatic targeting, you will have to master using your flashlight and vacuum to make it out alive. There are two movement modes in Luigi's Mansion: Standard, where the control stick influences Luigi's direction, and Sidestep, where you rotate Luigi using the C-stick as if you had the vacuum out at all times. I personally always play with standard controls, so if you're wondering why there's no footage of the sidestep movement, then that's why. Despite the unique gameplay, it's very easy to learn because of how intuitive the controls are, even for something this non-traditional. It takes little time for the poltergust to become second nature, and that's a major reason why the game is able to suck you in, sorry not sorry. Pulling away from ghosts is a natural, almost instinctual feeling where you're reacting to the visuals on screen constantly, coordinating the relation between Luigi and the environment around him. And figuring out the limits you can push with your tools is incredibly rewarding when you're able to clear out a room without making a mistake. Learning how to properly rotate yourself and knowing when the best time to shine the flashlight is essential for grabbing multiple ghosts at once, which feels so incredible to pull off. It's also important to learn how to control the vacuum so Luigi can get his hands on all the money scattered around the house, because this mansion is absolutely loaded with bills, coins, and even gemstones, all of which are added to Luigi's total cash. This doesn't affect anything other than a ranking, but it's an awesome feeling seeing that number increase when it's tabulating, especially since those big figures are so pleasing to my dumb monkey brain. Just about the only mechanic I feel wasn't successfully implemented was the elemental metals that Luigi finds throughout the mansion. These allow you to blow out fire, water, or ice depending on which element you have stored, but except for situations where they're required to clear a room or solve a puzzle, I don't find them all that useful. They don't provide any advantage when hunting ghosts unless they consist of an opposing element, but those ghosts appear so infrequently that it's basically pointless even if the idea is an interesting one. Most of the mansion is locked when you begin the game, and throughout the adventure, Luigi is stuck on a linear pathway. Clearing out a room usually gives you a key that opens up the next room, and the map always shows what any key you pick up unlocks. You're free to explore at your leisure, but once a room is cleared out, there's little point in going back to one unless you're hunting for boos. Boos like to hide in fully lit rooms, and once you coax them out, it becomes a matter of giving them enough vacuum power to capture them, though since you can't lock onto them, they can escape from your grasp and run away into adjoining rooms. And that becomes incredibly annoying when they disappear into a room that's not easily accessible because you have to either chase them down or reload the save to start capturing them again. The game is divided into 4 areas that are really a means to divide progression rather than the actual layout of the map. Each new section is hidden behind a locked door that opens up new rooms and hallways, and with the exception of a few secret rooms, you'll visit just about every part of the haunted dwelling as part of the story. At its core, the mansion is designed like a typical home with all the expected furnishing plus areas designed for a specific activity, and yet it's the way you navigate through the mansion that makes it a more mystifying setting. You're going back and forth between different areas of the mansion and often double backing to a few specific locations like the front of the manor, and these rooms naturally become more comforting to you. You clear them out early, so walking through them becomes a breath of fresh air compared to the darker rooms that lie ahead. And even when you've completed the majority of the mansion, it doesn't make the process of exploring new territory any less interesting because of how the rooms are laid out. Each room introduces its own challenge based on the arrangement of the decorum, with some rooms giving you lots of space to move around and others giving you very little. Most rooms aren't very big, but they're all crammed with objects and hazards, enhancing the claustrophobic feeling you get when you're trapped in a room with ghosts popping out. The only rooms that give you plenty of space to move around are the boss encounters, increasing your range of movement but also leaving room for the enemy's larger and more dangerous attacks. You never really know what kind of room you're going to get until you head inside, and the mansion's filled to the brim with both traditional bedrooms, bathrooms, and living rooms, and also rooms that tie in with the theme of the portrait ghost contained within. It makes the mansion feel more like an organic living thing because of the variety of each location, and honestly, the mansion is just as much a character in Luigi's Mansion as the actual cast of friends and enemies. But even though this place has a diverse list of areas to visit, there aren't a lot of annoying room-specific gimmicks. Most of what you're able to accomplish is done by just knowing what to shove or use your vacuum on, so it's easy enough to figure out what the game wants you to do. It's not just the physical design of each section that makes the mansion such an amazing setting though, it's also the aesthetics of both the environment and the game overall. As a launch title for the GameCube, the graphical fidelity is not super crisp, and while it was a significant leap over the visuals of the 5th generation, it does look very smooth nowadays. But Luigi's Mansion more than makes up for it in the art direction, especially the styling of the titular residence. The game is absolutely drenched in a dark atmosphere, literally, as you're spending the majority of your time in unlit rooms that can only be brightened up by capturing ghosts. There's enough light so that you can see Luigi and your surroundings clear enough, but you're still trapped in the shadows most of the time, and that makes for a seriously engrossing setting to explore. The effect of this is unfortunately somewhat diminished if you play on a high-definition TV like I did because they render colors differently, though you don't see that in the footage I captured. It makes this a game I'd recommend playing on a CRT monitor if possible, as it just heightens the mood of these dark places even more. But even when a room had the lights turned on though, the mansion is still a decently dreary place thanks to the color choices. The palette of the environments are very muted, focusing on duller colors that don't stick out too much against the backdrop. Even Luigi's clothes, while they are the classic green and blue combo, also seem more toned down when placed against these drab locations. Ironically, it's the ghosts themselves that bring the most color into the game, as they've got bright hues with lighter shades that just pop right out of the screen, appropriate because they pop right out of thin air to scare you. It's actually an interesting twist on the conventions of survival horror where designers will hide enemies in the shadows and you don't know where they are unless you shine a light on them or notice the movement around you. In here, you're actually the safest when you can't see any ghosts, as they make their presence known whenever possible. And that makes sense, as these enemies are silly and mischievous, taunting Luigi rather than just going into murder mode all the time. The portrait ghosts are similar, though they often don't actively hunt Luigi unless he provokes them, and since their designs are more involved than the flat single-color regular ghost, it helps them stick out as actual characters rather than just an objective you need to knock out. The designers stick within the family-friendly and comedic nature of Luigi's Mansion, where the horror is found in the aesthetics and not the mood. There's nothing in Luigi's Mansion that I found outright scary, even as a kid, but the darker tone is obvious and gives this game a unique position against other Nintendo titles of the era. The mansion's architecture is simultaneously graceful and twisted, almost like a Gothic-style mansion rendered through a funhouse mirror. It never looks quite so rigid and formal that it would be out of place for a Mario game, and yet it purposefully forgoes many of the traditional elements of Mario's stage design to craft a bizarre but still familiar vibe. It's also a very minimalist setting, letting you soak in the elegance of each room rather than just blinding you with flashiness. That minimalistic touch also applies to the music, which is purposefully very low-key in most places and only ramping up when it's appropriate. The soundtrack was composed by Mario Paint and Super Mario Land 2 composer Kazumi Totaka and Mario Kart composer Shinobu Nagata, and if nothing else, their work on this game is certainly eclectic. The main theme combines a string and theremin background with a lead performed by Luigi humming the main melody, as well as a quiet chorus of ghosts, an interesting combination of diegetic and non-diegetic music. But at other times, the soundtrack takes a more electro-hip-hop angle, with many shrill and discordant synthesizers and percussion beats that sound like they were taken directly from sample packs or drum machines. The music often emphasizes short, sharp notes rather than sustained pads or drones, and while it's not necessarily my cup of tea, I do admit that the soundtrack is certainly an intriguing companion to the gameplay. Oddly enough though, I can't get enough of the jingle that plays when Luigi grabs a key. It's so scratchy and weird, but it never fails to leave my head. It's also that goofy grin and laugh that sell it for me, and I just love it. And that's the element of Luigi's Mansion that really stood out to me as I played it again. The game is chock full of personality. The characters exude such charisma because the designers added small quirks and traits that, when added together, just ooze charm and radiance. The animations in particular manipulate character sizes as well as squashing and stretching models to emphasize the heightened intensity of certain situations, such as Luigi jumping with fright when a ghost pops out. That, combined with the noises the enemies make when they spawn, shows that while the ghosts are terrifying in universe, these aren't your average horror game foes and you're not meant to take them super seriously. That makes the boss encounters, who give off a more serious and threatening aura, all the more memorable because they provide a nice contrast to the more impish enemies you see in the rest of the game. Egad is another example of how the game creates a memorable cast, as his bizarre vocabulary and speech patterns inspired by Animal Crossing characters instantly paints him as a wonderfully weird companion. I already talked about the designs of the portrait ghosts, and they've also got their own characteristics that suit their gimmick, and make each one stand out from each other, but that goes for the normal enemies too. Each ghost has its own color scheme and body shape, making it easy to tell at a glance what each one is and which ones are the bigger threat to you. It's helpful in prioritizing actions in combat, but also gives these otherwise common enemies an oddly welcoming presence because of how sly and rambunctious they are while fighting Luigi. Speaking of Luigi, he's also packed with a healthy dose of personality. Not a ton, mind you, but enough to make him a defined character. This came out the same year as Paper Mario, the first title to really give Luigi a personality of his own beyond just being in Mario's shadow, but it's here where his most famous character trait began, his cowardice. Luigi is timid, nervous, and easily frightened, getting shocked at sudden noises and occasionally screaming in fear when confronted by an enemy. This was already sort of established in the cartoon series The Super Mario Bros. Super Show, but Luigi's Mansion was the first game to showcase this side of him and would codify it for years to come. It's not his only trait, however, because when the time comes for him to rise up to the challenge, he'll do so without any regrets. When he first learns that his brother hasn't come back from the mansion, he immediately takes it upon himself to go in and find him, a heartwarming little moment that shows his inner bravery. It's not much, but subtle little things like that go a long way in making Luigi feel more like a character rather than just a figure through which the player interacts with the game's world. My favorite aspect of Luigi's personality, though, is when you scan objects in each room, it reveals what Luigi's thinking, which provides us with some actual dialogue, albeit just in thoughts running through Luigi's head. He'll comment on things, marvel at something beautiful, grow anxious at things that look unnerving, and even sometimes throw out a snide or cheeky remark when he sees something he doesn't like. Luigi actually has tastes, likes and dislikes, and opinions on things, which, yes, is a basic checkbox for a character, but is miles beyond what any mainstream Mario game, spin-off or otherwise, had done before. And that's what I find defines the game more than any other element, how much life and magnetism it pumped into the characters and the world. Of course, the gameplay is enjoyable and the aesthetics are well crafted, but more than anything, Luigi's Mansion is charming. For as short as it is, you can probably beat it in no more than 6 hours on your first try, the game is consistently appealing thanks to its grasp on off-the-wall humor and character designs. It makes the game stand out against contemporary titles from Nintendo alongside its non-conventional gameplay. That's also what I believe makes it such an acclaimed adventure, because while it was likely always going to sell well, its willingness to go beyond the expected boundaries of what people wanted from Nintendo and the execution of its ideas helped give it a glowing reputation. But despite the popularity of Luigi's Mansion and its commercial success, it would be a while before we got a true follow-up. The game would be referenced in other Mario media, but it wasn't until 2013 when Nintendo brought us a sequel, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. Developed by Mario Strikers and Punch-Out Wii studio Next Level Games, Dark Moon featured Luigi returning to help Egad once again take down King Boo, whose actions have caused the normally peaceful ghosts of Evershade Valley to turn hostile. I never finished Dark Moon, though I remember liking what I played, and in case you're wondering, I'm going to look at the other Luigi's Mansion games in their own videos at some point, so I'll have more to say then. In 2018, Nintendo dropped 2 Luigi's Mansion announcements, a remake of the original game for the 3DS and Luigi's Mansion 3 for the Switch. The remake was developed by Grezzo, the studio behind the remakes of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and in addition to adding content like local co-op and a boss rush, it gave Nintendo a way to add the planned 3D functionality thanks to the system's support for stereoscopic 3D. And this makes a ton of sense when you consider that Hideki Kono was the producer on the 3DS system, so of course he'd want to revisit the feature originally abandoned due to production expenses. Full disclosure, I haven't played this version and can thus only judge it from watching footage from others, and it definitely looks like a faithful recreation even though some animations look off to me. Then there's Luigi's Mansion 3, also developed by Next Level Games and released in 2019, taking place in a haunted hotel with different themes and ghosts on each floor. I really like this game and consider it a must-play for those who love the original, but again, I'll go more in depth when I eventually do a video on it. But even though the sequels are quality games in their own right, to me, it felt like something was missing from them compared to the original. It seemed like Nintendo was more afraid to take risks with these games, as if they were afraid to disappoint both longtime Luigi's Mansion players and Mario fans jumping into the series for the first time, and as such, the spirit, pardon the pun, of the original didn't fully translate. That's not a knock on these games, but more a testament to both how well crafted the first game is and how much of a product of its time it was. Nintendo has evolved as a company since the GameCube era, and you can debate whether or not it was for the better, but the change certainly left an impact on these future installments. There probably won't be another game like the original Luigi's Mansion ever again, but you know what? I'm fine with that, because this is such a tightly manufactured gem of a game that it would be hard to replicate it. It's certainly an odd duck in Nintendo's library, but one that absolutely deserves to be put on the same pedestal as the company's other greatest hits of the GameCube era. And frankly, it's the adventure that everyone's favorite video game Second Banana deserved as well. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it, then leave it a like and consider subscribing if you want to see more Cloud Connection videos. And in case you missed the announcement, I just relaunched the Cloud Connection Patreon, so if you want to help support the channel, you can check that out too. Thanks for watching!